Welcome back to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. Today we're embarking on a fascinating journey through the Quran, specifically exploring its third chapter, Al-E-Imran.
Sounds good.
Now, even if you're not particularly religious, stick with us.
Yeah.
This deep dive isn't just about faith.
Right.
It's about history, ethics, and timeless human stories that resonate with us all.
It's what's so captivating about Al-Imran is that it offers this intricate blend of historical narrative, spiritual guidance, and philosophical reflection. It's a chapter that has intrigued scholars and believers alike for centuries.
Exactly. It's like a window into the heart of Islam, offering insights into its core beliefs and values.
Right.
By the end of this deep dive, we guarantee you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of this pivotal text and the Islamic faith itself. So hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey of discovery.
Right.
Only on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel.
Now, before we delve into the complexities of Al-Imran, let's lay some groundwork. The chapter gets its name, the family of Imran, from a lineage that includes key figures like Imran, Saint Anne Mary, and Jesus.
Okay.
These figures, of course, hold significance in both Christianity and Islam.
Okay, that piqued my interest right away. We're talking about figures who are central to two major world religions.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this connection and how it's presented in Al-Imran.
Well, Al-Imran highlights these shared narratives, but also emphasizes the distinct perspectives that Islam holds.
Okay.
For instance, Mary, mother of Jesus, is revered in the Quran as a chosen woman blessed with a miraculous birth.
So far, so good. That seems pretty consistent with Christian beliefs as well.
Yes, but here's where the divergence begins.
Okay.
While Christianity views Jesus as divine, the Son of God, the Quran emphasizes his role as a prophet of God.
Now that's a crucial distinction for our listeners to grasp.
Right.
The nature of Jesus is a fundamental difference between these two faiths.
Yes.
So Al-Imran acknowledges Jesus, but positions him within the Islamic framework of prophethood.
Precisely. And this distinction reflects a core principle of Islam, the oneness of God, a theme that runs throughout Al-Imran. So while there are shared narratives, the interpretations and theological implications differ.
That makes perfect sense. It's like looking at the same story through different lenses, each revealing unique facets. Now, I was reading that there's some debate about the actual figure of Imran himself.
Yeah.
Who he was and how the Quran's account lines up with, say, the Bible.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on that for our listeners on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel?
You're right. There are different interpretations regarding Imran's identity and potential discrepancies between biblical and Quranic accounts. Some Islamic scholars believe that the Imran referenced in the Quran might not be the same figure as the one mentioned in Christian tradition.
So it's not as straightforward as a simple genealogical connection.
Exactly. This is where Islamic scholarship delves into the symbolic and spiritual significance of these connections. Some scholars suggest the Quran might be highlighting a shared spiritual lineage between Mary, mother of Jesus, and Mary, the sister of Moses, even if they weren't directly related by blood.
Wow, that's a fascinating perspective.
Yeah.
It's not just about biological ties, but a deeper connection through spiritual qualities and roles.
Right.
It adds another layer of complexity and meaning to this family lineage.
Absolutely. And it's these layers of interpretation and historical context that make studying Al-Imran so enriching. But let's move beyond the family of Imran for a moment.
Okay.
As you know, the Quran is much more than just stories.
Right. It's a guide for life, offering ethical and moral teachings for believers. So what are some of the other themes that Al-Imran explores?
Well, the chapter covers a wide spectrum of topics. It delves into God's oneness, the importance of believing in the Quran, and the stories of previous prophets. It offers guidelines for believers and contrasts the fate of believers and non-believers.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. To give our listeners on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel a bit more context, can you elaborate on those themes?
Certainly. The emphasis on God's oneness, or Tawhid, is fundamental to Islam. Al-Imran reinforces this concept, reminding believers of God's unique power and authority.
So it's a call to devotion and recognizing the absolute singularity of God.
Exactly. Then there's the importance of believing in the Quran itself. Al-Imran emphasizes the divine origin of the Quran, highlighting its role as a source of guidance and revelation.
Essentially, it's about affirming the Quran as a sacred text and embracing its teachings.
Yes. Now, another fascinating aspect is the inclusion of stories about previous prophets.
Okay.
This serves to connect the message of Islam to a broader prophetic tradition, tracing a lineage back to figures like Abraham, Moses, and of course, Jesus.
It's like placing the Prophet Muhammad within a long line of messengers who came before him, each building upon the foundations laid by their predecessors.
Precisely. And through these stories, Al-Imran draws moral and spiritual lessons for believers, highlighting the importance of faith, righteousness, and perseverance.
So it's not just about recounting historical events, but extracting timeless wisdom for believers to apply in their own lives.
Exactly. Now, Al-Imran doesn't shy away from addressing the consequences of belief and disbelief.
Okay.
It contrasts the rewards awaiting those who follow God's path with the consequences faced by those who reject it.
So it's a reminder of the ultimate stakes involved in choosing a path of faith or turning away from it. But it's not just about abstract concepts and teachings.
Right.
Al-Imran also delves into specific historical events.
Right. That's right. And one of the most intriguing historical narratives in Al-Imran revolves around the Battle of Badr.
Okay.
This battle, which took place in 624 CE, was a pivotal moment in early Islamic history.
Okay, for our listeners who might not be familiar with this event,
Sure.
could you give us some background on the Battle of Badr and why it's so significant?
Certainly, the Battle of Badr was a decisive victory for the early Muslims against a much larger Meccan force. It's considered a turning point in the establishment of the Muslim community in Medina.
So it was a David and Goliath situation with the outnumbered Muslims prevailing against all odds.
Indeed, and Al-Imran offers a unique perspective on this battle,
Okay.
particularly highlighting the belief in divine intervention.
Divine intervention, what do you mean?
The chapter specifically, verses 121, 11, 26, describes angels being sent down by God to assist the believers in battle.
Wait, angels actually fought alongside the Muslims. No, that's something you don't hear every day. What more can you tell us about this? This is the Great Indian AI podcast channel, and our listeners love this kind of detail.
Well, the Quran itself doesn't mention specific names,
Okay.
but Islamic tradition, particularly the hadiths, offer more detailed accounts.
Okay.
They name prominent angels like Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael as participants in the battle.
Wow, so some of the most revered figures in the angelic realm were involved in this battle. That's incredible. I can only imagine the awe and inspiration that the early Muslims must have felt knowing they had such powerful allies. Hold on, how many angels are we talking about here? Just a handful, or was it a full-on celestial army?
According to the hadiths, thousands of angels descended from the heavens to aid the Muslims.
Wow.
Some accounts even depict them riding mystical horses adorned with distinctive markings.
Wow. So it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. This was a major angelic intervention. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
It's certainly a vivid and dramatic narrative. And there's another intriguing detail.
Okay.
Some accounts suggest that the angels took on the appearance of Zubair ibn al-Awwam, a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad, renowned for his bravery and military skill.
So not only did the Muslims have angelic backup, but they also had the added psychological advantage of their enemies seeing them as a force led by one of their most formidable warriors. Talk about a strategic advantage.
Indeed, it's a fascinating blend of the supernatural and the human, highlighting the belief in divine support that permeated the early Muslim community.
This is absolutely captivating. It really brings those historical events to life and underscores the profound faith that fueled the early Muslims' actions. But we've covered so much ground already, and there's still more to explore in Al-Imran.
Yes, there is. In fact, we haven't even touched upon the Battle of Uhud, another significant event discussed in this chapter, and how it presented a different kind of challenge for the Muslims.
Okay, well, we'll definitely have to delve into that in our next segment. But for now, we encourage our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel to ponder what we've discussed so far.
Right.
Think about the intersection of faith and history, the nature of prophethood, and the concept of divine intervention.
Yeah.
We'll be back shortly to continue our exploration of Al-Imran. In the meantime, why not hit that like button and share this episode with your friends? Let's spread the knowledge and keep the conversation going.
Sounds great. Welcome back to the Great Indian AI podcast channel. As we continue our exploration of Al-Imran, we're shifting gears from the triumphant victory at Badr to a more challenging chapter in early Islamic history, the Battle of Uhud.
Yes, you mentioned this earlier. Now, for our listeners, can you set the stage for us? What happened at Uhud, and how does Al-Imran reflect on this event?
The Battle of Uhud took place just a year after the victory at Badr. Despite initial successes, the Muslim army faced a setback and suffered significant losses.
Okay.
It was a difficult test for the early Muslim community.
So a stark contrast to the resounding victory at Badr. How did this experience shape their faith, and what insights does Al-Imran offer about this period?
Al-Imran doesn't shy away from recounting the challenges and setbacks faced by the Muslims. It acknowledges the pain of loss and the complexities of navigating adversity while holding on to faith. In fact, one of the most intriguing passages related to Uhud involves a peculiar experience described by the Muslims before the battle commenced.
Oh yes, I remember reading about this. There was something about drowsiness overcoming the Muslims before the fighting even began.
Right.
It seems almost counterintuitive when you say you're about to face a fierce enemy and you're suddenly hit with a wave of sleepiness.
It does appear paradoxical on the surface, but this is where understanding the spiritual dimension within Islamic tradition is crucial.
Okay, so walk me through this. What exactly does the Quran say about this drowsiness, and how is it interpreted within Islamic thought?
Verse 154 of Al-Imran describes this feeling of drowsiness and comfort enveloping the Muslims. It's not seen as a sign of weakness or fear, but rather as a manifestation of divine intervention, a moment of tranquility bestowed upon them amidst the impending chaos.
So instead of viewing it as a physical or psychological limitation, it's interpreted as a spiritual experience.
Precisely. And then this interpretation is further supported by the hadiths, which contain detailed accounts of the Muslims' experiences during this time.
Are there any specific accounts from the hadiths that stand out? I'm sure our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel would be fascinated to hear those firsthand perspectives.
There's a particularly vivid account from Zubair ibn al-Awwam, the same warrior whose appearance the angels supposedly took during the Battle of Badr. He describes feeling an intense drowsiness he couldn't resist, even though he knew the battle was about to begin.
So even a seasoned warrior like Zubair, who had proven his courage at Badr, was affected by this. It must have been a powerful experience to override his natural instincts and training.
It seems so. And his account, along with others from the Hadiths, indicates that this experience was widespread among the Muslims, not just an isolated incident.
That makes me think about the various ways we interpret events, especially when they involve faith and spirituality. What might seem like a physical or psychological phenomenon could be perceived as a divine message or intervention, depending on one's worldview.
That's a keen observation. The interpretation of events through a spiritual lens is a recurring theme in Al-Imran. It encourages us to look beyond the surface and consider deeper meanings. Now, going back to the drowsiness experienced by the Muslims before Uhud, some might question this interpretation and see it as fear or a lack of preparation, wouldn't you say?
That's a valid point. If I were approaching this from a purely secular perspective, I might wonder if fatigue or anxiety played a role. After all, they were about to face a formidable enemy in a battle that would determine their future.
Exactly. But Islamic scholars offer a different perspective. They argue that this drowsiness was a test of faith, a means of demonstrating their complete trust in God's plan, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds.
So it was about surrendering to a higher power and trusting that the outcome, regardless of their own efforts, was ultimately in God's hands.
Precisely. And by succumbing to this drowsiness, the Muslims demonstrated their unwavering faith and their belief that victory or defeat was not solely determined by human actions, but by divine will.
This is incredibly thought-provoking. It makes you think about the role of faith in times of adversity and how different perspectives shape our understanding of events. It's also a powerful reminder that interpretations can vary widely, even within the same faith tradition.
You've hit upon a crucial point. There is no monolithic interpretation of any religious text, including the Quran. Al-Imran itself has been subject to various interpretations throughout history, each reflecting the context and understanding of the scholars and communities engaging with it.
That's a valuable insight for our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel. It's important to approach religious texts with an open mind and recognize that different perspectives exist. And it's through exploring these diverse viewpoints that we can gain a richer and more nuanced understanding of the text itself. But before we get too deep into the intricacies of interpretation, let's take a step back and revisit the historical context of Al-Imran.
Excellent point. Remember, Al-Imran was revealed in Medina after the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca.
Right.
This period marked a significant shift in the development of the early Muslim community.
Right. They went from being a persecuted minority in Mecca to establishing a community in Medina, where they had more freedom to practice their faith and develop their social and political structures.
Exactly. So Al-Imran, as a Medinan surah, reflects this changing landscape. It addresses the challenges of establishing a new community, navigating relationships with other groups, and defining the principles of governance and social justice.
So it's a text that's very much grounded in its historical context, addressing the specific needs and realities of the Muslim community at that time. But at the same time, it transcends its historical context, offering timeless lessons on faith, ethics, and spirituality that resonate with believers across generations.
Absolutely, and that's what makes studying Al-Imran so fascinating. It's a window into a particular moment in history, but it also offers enduring insights into the human condition and our relationship with the divine.
This is truly a deep dive, and I'm appreciating all the nuances and layers we're uncovering. But as always, time seems to be slipping away from us. We've still got more to discuss, including some of the broader themes and messages embedded within Al-Imran.
Indeed. There's much more to explore, including the chapter's teachings on mercy, forgiveness, and the importance of striving for righteousness. We'll delve into these aspects and more when we return for the final part of our deep dive into Al-Imran, right here on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel.
Don't go anywhere, listeners. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. We're wrapping up our deep dive into Al-Imran, the third chapter of the Quran, and I have to say this has been an incredibly insightful journey.
It has been a rich exploration. We've covered historical narratives, theological concepts, and spiritual reflections all interwoven within this fascinating chapter.
We've discussed the Battle of Badr, the test at Uhud, and the unique perspectives that Al-Imran offers on figures like Mary and Jesus, all within the context of Islamic belief.
And we've delved into the importance of God's oneness, the divine origin of the Quran, and the lessons learned from the stories of previous prophets.
Right, but there's one aspect we haven't fully explored yet, the ethical and moral guidance that Al-Imran provides. Not just about history and theology, it's about living a righteous life, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, Al-Imran offers a wealth of guidance on how believers should conduct themselves in various aspects of life. It emphasizes principles like justice, compassion, honesty, and fulfilling one's obligations.
So it's like a moral compass guiding believers towards a path of righteousness and ethical conduct. Can you give our listeners on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel some specific examples of these moral teachings?
Certainly, Al-Imran stresses the importance of treating others with kindness and fairness, regardless of their beliefs or background. It condemns oppression and injustice, urging believers to stand up for the rights of the marginalized and vulnerable.
That resonates with the concept of social justice, which is a core value in many faith traditions. It's about creating a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their differences.
Exactly. And Al-Imran also emphasizes the importance of family ties, urging believers to honor their parents and care for their relatives. It speaks about the significance of marriage as a foundation for building a stable and righteous society.
So it addresses both individual ethics and social responsibility, guiding believers on how to live harmoniously within a community.
Precisely. And beyond outward actions, Al-Imran also emphasizes the importance of inner purification. It stresses the need for sincerity in worship, humility before God, and constant striving for self-improvement.
It's about cultivating a virtuous character, not just performing rituals or adhering to a set of rules. It's about aligning one's heart and intentions with the divine will.
Yes. And this focus on inner purification connects beautifully with the theme of mercy and forgiveness, which is central to Al-Imran.
Oh yes, I wanted to touch upon that Islam is often associated with these qualities, and I'm curious how Al-Imran reflects this aspect.
Al-Imran repeatedly emphasizes God's boundless mercy and forgiveness. It encourages believers to seek forgiveness for their transgressions and to extend forgiveness to others.
So it's about recognizing human fallibility and the importance of compassion and reconciliation, both in our relationship with God and with each other.
Exactly. It's a powerful message of hope and redemption. It reminds us that even when we stumble, we can always turn back to God and seek His mercy. And by extending that same mercy to others, we create a more compassionate and forgiving world.
These are incredibly profound teachings, and they resonate deeply with me, even as someone who's not a Muslim. It speaks to a universal human longing for connection, forgiveness, and a path towards goodness.
That's the beauty of exploring these sacred texts. They offer insights and wisdom that transcend individual beliefs and touch upon shared human values.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into Al-Imran here on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel, I want to ask you, what is the most crucial takeaway you hope our listeners will glean from this exploration?
I believe the most important takeaway is that Al-Imran, despite being rooted in a specific historical context, offers timeless guidance relevant to all of us. Its teachings on faith, ethics, compassion, and the pursuit of righteousness resonate across cultures and beliefs.
Beautifully said. And I hope our listeners, regardless of their background, have gained a deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of this chapter and the Islamic faith itself.
I hope so too. And I encourage everyone listening to continue exploring Al-Imran on their own. There's so much depth to uncover and so much wisdom to be gained from engaging with this remarkable text.
Absolutely. Now, before we sign off, I have to express my gratitude to you for joining us on this journey through Al-Imran. Your insights have been incredibly valuable and have enriched our understanding of this profound chapter.
The pleasure has been all mine. It's always a joy to delve into these sacred texts and share these explorations with a wider audience.
And to our wonderful listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel, thank you for tuning in and engaging with us on this deep dive. We hope you found it enlightening and thought-provoking.
We encourage you to leave your comments, reflections, and questions in the section below. We always love hearing from our listeners.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the Great Indian AI podcast channel for more fascinating explorations of culture, history, and ideas.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep seeking knowledge.
From all of us here at the Great Indian AI podcast channel, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on our next deep dive.